Leadership is the ability to create change. Wherever you are, whatever role you're in right now, there's some opportunity for you to initiate change, to begin to lean into the process of leading something.
Justin.
Sam.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your time here.
Yeah.
I have no real perfect place to start this, so I was just thinking we might begin at the beginning, talking about leadership, and I'm wondering if you can remember the first time you identified it. Who was there? What was going on?
Yeah.
Leaders, leadership.
I was thinking about this in preparation for our time together today, and I'm sure that I've experienced leadership and seen leaders in my own family growing up. Somebody would lead a moment or lead us to do something, or playing sports and coaches talking about leadership, or teachers talking about leadership, or it was clearly something I knew about. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I don't think I actually ever recognized leadership for what it was till probably just about 10 years ago. And it was the moment where I think I'd had lots of responsibilities in my life up to that point, different things I had to do, tasks, classes, even jobs. But it was the first time I found myself in a job where some change needed to happen, and it was on my shoulders to negotiate that change. And so I was working at a church as a youth director, and this was a church that had about 5,000 members, but they only had about 30 kids come into their youth group. And so they had hired me and just said, we need you to kind of change this, like fix our youth program. And I remember coming in, and for the first time, it wasn't just somebody telling me exactly what to do and then me doing it, but here's a problem, create a solution, how are you going to go about doing that? And I just remember this overwhelming sense of like, how in the world do I do this? One of the things I realized right away is that a number of the volunteers who'd been a part of this organization, many of them for 20, 30 years, we were going to probably need to say goodbye to them. We were going to have to give them a nice dismissal and recruit new talent and get some vision and find staff and the rest. And all of a sudden I realized all the buy-in I would need, all the people who would have to follow along. And that was the first time that I woke up to, oh my gosh, leadership's a real thing. I don't know how to do it. How does anybody in this world get anything done and get buy-in, and especially negotiate conflict and change and the rest? And so it was probably the first time I really remember this sense of honestly respecting leadership as something that I think up to that point in my life, if somebody were asking me about leadership, I would have kind of made some snarky joke that it's about eye contact and good firm handshakes, and that lots of people fill lots of books with stuff that everybody knows and get rich off of it. And that day I woke up to, oh no, this is really hard, and I have no idea how to do this, and began buying all those books and watching everybody in my life who seemed to be leading anything or negotiating any sort of change. And so I wish that I had been paying attention to leadership for a lot longer in my life, but I think I was just numb to it. I think I was blind to leadership that was happening around me until I myself was in a space where I had to do it and realized I was unprepared, didn't know how. So I think that's the first moment I really feel it. Not that there weren't leaders around me or that I can now look back on, but I didn't know it in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you were like the first real conscious memory you've got of leadership is when you were kind of thrown in that pool.
Yeah.
And kind of looked around and felt like a lot of people feel, I think, just like completely unprepared. I'm assuming that went well, or I doubt I'd be talking to you here today. I mean, just continue just with that journey. I mean, it sounded like some really difficult decisions that you needed to make and implement. And how'd you go about that, and how did that work? And then also just, I'm assuming, sort of there was a new momentum that was established. Work us through that early journey.
Yeah. One of the reasons that maybe I also didn't recognize leadership so much around me is that, at the time I think I was still in my early 20s, and it's that moment where you're still pretty self-obsessed, and you don't even know it. And so I figured that everybody was wired the way that I was wired, and everybody does what I do, and everybody likes what And so not only did I not recognize leadership gifts in people around me, but I didn't recognize that some of my own just hardwiring was in a natural direction towards leadership, of things like, I think have some innate gifts just for communication and I think passion and casting vision, and I can get excited about things that can become contagious to other people around me. And so honestly, at that early entry into leadership, the beginning of that, I think did go pretty well and largely rode on just some of my natural abilities and talents around just seeing what needed to happen and doing that, and then bringing other people along, communicating what we were doing. And a lot of that was natural for me. And so it went fairly well, for the first few months. But then eventually something actually does start to grow, and you can't do it all by yourself. And that's where I kind of really hit the okay, this is where my gifts start to run out of gas, and I need some other people. And I had not really worked on that over the course of I was not a group project kind of guy. I had not spent a lot of time really refining interpersonal skills or thinking about how to appropriately bring people along, or how much information is the right amount at a certain time, or too much, or all of those sorts of things. So at the beginning, I think you can get a little bit of a adrenaline shot just with kind of a person who steps up and says, I know where we're headed and let's go there. And then, we start hiring staff and we start building volunteers and we start creating systems, and pretty quickly I ran out of my own runway and needed other people. And that's when I started learning the hard lessons of leadership. That's when things probably got a little bumpy, and in many ways continue to be, as I realize and respect kind of leadership more and more, and the art of it even today. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the art, not the science. Yeah. It's maybe some combination of the two, but if you were asked to define it, leadership, so what, given your experiences and all of that, what definition, if you have one?
Yeah, and I think, and it'll show a little bit of my own bias, I think there's a lot of great definitions out there on leadership. I think, if I'm being honest, this may not be the best definition of leadership, and it may not be a healthy one for other people to have, but if I were to answer it honestly, I would say that I operate out of a sense that leadership is the ability to create change. Some people would define it as influence, but for me it's just anybody who can make change, who can help people make change, who can help organizations create change, who can change the world. Leadership is just the ability to create change in my mind. That's I'm a pretty task-oriented person, so I think that's largely why I see it that way, but that would probably be my shortest, best definition of how to go about doing that.
In that context, and by the way, good news here, I don't disagree with you. Usually when you talk about leadership, no matter how you define it, it's under this umbrella of change management, and in some case, maybe even stability, kind of creating the long-term aspect of the change and kind of reinforcing that. But why so many problems? Why so many influence-related, leadership-related? I mean, maybe that has something to do with just the pervasiveness of change. I don't know, but why are there so many, in all realms of life, leadership challenges?
Gosh, I don't know. I feel them. I think we're all resistant to change. Even leaders are resistant to change. Even people who moniker as I create change have their own kind of tolerance level. For me, I think a lot of it too is change is about loss of control. I think a lot of change means that it's this dance of pursuing a future that we think we all want, but realizing that we might not be control the outcome or how we get there, or when we get there. So I think we're all creatures who want that stability, and we get attached to it when we find it. And continuing to lead people, and then it's just people. I often say that what I do would be so easy if it weren't for people. And I think that's probably true not only of the church, but also of organizations. And yet people are complex, and few of us are wired kind of exactly the same way, and what motivates one person doesn't motivate the other. And I'll work with one person or one idea long enough to finally figure it out, and then find that it doesn't work at all in this situation or this person. And remaining adaptive is just, I think, so much of the challenge for all of us involved who are trying to do anything worthwhile. So.
Yeah, most people are all for teams as long as they're the team captain.
That's it.
And most people are all for change as long as it's change they believe in and that they're driving. Right. But when it's change that sort of challenges what you think, what you believe, the way you think things should be, it's a whole different thing. But there's some sort of interesting mix here between, leadership is like vision,
right,
and tough decisions and all of that sort of thing. And then the whole servant aspect to it, like being really responsive and adaptive to other people. So what experience have you had or advice would you have associated with implementing a vision that challenges the status quo of people where you're still trying to adapt to kind of meet their needs somehow, some way?
And I would say those have been the two kind of chapters in my journey so far, which I feel like I'm at the very beginning of discovering what leadership's about and finding my own leadership voice. And, I've only been awake to this for, like I said, maybe 8 or 9 years. So I think the first chapter of kind of my leadership journey was tapping into my innate gifts, which were around vision and communication and clarity and focus about who we are and what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. The second chapter was realizing that wasn't enough. And now I'm leaning into places that I'm not as comfortable in, that I'm not as good at, which are a lot more of the interpersonal, the relational, the servant leadership stuff. And honestly, when I hang out with 20-year-olds and who really want to lead, they like the idea of the title or of them being ideators who are like creating. But I don't think anybody gets real, at least most of the folks, at least who are wired like me that I connect with and often spend time with, very rarely in your 20s do you recognize that so much of leadership is going to be this deal where you're actually committed more to the success of the people who serve you and work for you than you are your own. That it's about pouring your own life out, emptying your own cup into other people, that moving your own agenda forward often gets there quickest by developing other people. And man, that is not what I thought I signed up for. I thought when I started in leadership, I just thought the best ideas win. I got the best ideas, we'll win, and then realized pretty quickly that ideas and charisma honestly have a pretty low ceiling and a short expiration date. When I got hungry for leadership and sat down with lots of great leaders, one of the things I would realize is like some of the greatest leaders who had the most influence in our city, just to be honest, they didn't strike me as having like the sharpest ideas or the brightest minds in the room, but they had created cultures that were developing people and moving folks along and serving their entire organization and saw themselves as kind of a leader in that way. And so that's been the new adjustment I feel like I'm, being forced to make every day to recenter my focus not on even my own agenda or my own success, but the success of those who are serving with me, working for me. And that's hard. And that's where all that relational stuff, and it's just a very different thing than what I originally thought leadership would be about.
What advice would you have to young leaders? Like given your experiences and kind of how you said you identified leadership for the first time, if you were going to say, okay, you aspire to have influence and have meaning in your life, here's what I think you should do. What would you pass on? What would you say to those aspiring leaders?
I mean, I think really just two things. The first thing would be just to initiate change. Wherever you are, whatever role you're in right now, whether you're a volunteer in some organization, whether you're a staff member, where you're administrative assistant, wherever you are, there's some opportunity for you to initiate change, to begin to lean into the process of leading something. And I think one of the traps that a lot of, especially some of my generation and millennials will fall into is they wait for somebody to give them the title or to give them influence to sort of bestow them with that. That happens, I suppose, for some rare cases. Most of the leaders I know, though, no one handed them influence, that they created it. That there was a day when they had none and they initiated change and it worked or it didn't work and they learned some things from it and then they improved. And eventually they had created enough influence that somebody gave them a title or whatever, but the influence was already there. The leadership abilities had already been developed. And I think it's a mistake to wait for somebody to invite you to change something and so wherever you are, whatever you see that needs to be, that you think you can improve or make better, lean into the arena, start wherever you're at and see where that goes. So, I mean, I think first just initiate change wherever you're at. And then the second thing is just evaluate that entire process and how that experience went. So much of leadership for me has been about the really painful experience of watching the tape. Literally listening to sermons I preached. I remember the first couple of years when I would speak. It was so painful. I mean, it's like that experience when you leave a voicemail and you just can't listen to it because it hurt. I can't possibly sound like that. But doing the hard work of listening. My first youth group that I was leading, I was tasked with communicating every week to a couple hundred students, middle schoolers, who were just miserable human beings. And there was this whole row of boys who would sit in the back. And for 4 years that I led them, every Sunday, they would come up at the end of my talk and go, 57, 63. And eventually I was like, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, that's how many times you said today. And I was like, they didn't listen to a word I said. They just sat back there and counted how many times. And I eventually just okay, I'm going to get to 0. We're going to figure this out. And I think those experiences of just doing an autopsy, you initiate change at work, it didn't work, what didn't work, and inviting feedback. Guys, how am I doing? How did that go? What's it like to be on the other side of me? So much of leadership is self-awareness. And much of us are so blind to the experience of ourselves to others. And so initiate some change and then just evaluate yourself. Do the personality profile work. Take some leadership curriculum, classes, development stuff, like the great stuff you guys do here, Center for Leadership Studies. I mean, I think those are incredible opportunities to learn more about your own leadership style and your strengths and weaknesses. And then regularly invite people in to give you feedback. People will give it to you if you ask for it, and you'll become a better leader because of it, and the organization will become stronger. It isn't without pain, but it's worth it. And so I think if folks initiate change and they evaluate what they do, that's a pretty significant pathway to growth. And along the way, you'll learn to be gentle with yourself, because otherwise you won't survive, and to take kind of your mission seriously, but yourself not so much. And those are the things that I think are really important if you're going to survive as a leader. So I think that's kind of what my advice would be to young folks getting going.
That would be awesome advice.
Yeah.
One other question. You are a husband and a father of 2 beautiful children. How does leadership, what you do at work, what other leaders do at work, how is that similar to or different from your responsibility as a husband and a father and kind of leading in your personal life? What sort of parallels and what sort of differences are there?
I think there's a lot of similarities. I think the challenge is, for a lot of us who are so passionate about our work, is that we can be so focused and purpose-oriented and kind of mission-driven at work. We can be so focused on developing people at work, at achieving some beautiful things together, that when we go home we sort of check out on all of that stuff with our families. And so for me, I think the challenge for me is to bring all of that same passion and energy and focus and mission and vision to developing my kids, for us as a family to have a shared sense of purpose and what we're about and how we live together, to create as much space at home for me to listen to my family as I am trying to create space to listen to my staff and those who volunteer in our organization. And in many ways, I think they're very similar, but unfortunately, I think very few of us make that connection. And some of the most gifted leaders who can build incredible organizations will often neglect their family. One of my mentors has reminded me that often maybe the most significant thing you do in your life won't be kind of an organization you build or a company you create, but a human being that you raise or a person that you love. And so it's kind of a humbling realization that I have pretty regularly, that in the same way that I need to be growing as a leader at work, I need to be growing as a husband and a father regularly at home. And that if those two things aren't happening at the same time, pretty soon, that integrity that I want for my life, it will impact both. That I can't just be an incredible sort of leader and neglect my family, because pretty quickly I won't be that great of a leader. And so they both have to kind of rise together. So that's the next chapter for me as well, is learning how to balance those things to create the space and time and intentionality there as well.
From my perspective, so far so good. On that,
we're trying.
Yeah, parenting gets a little different though when your kids hit middle school. So don't be a lot of.
I'll keep low expectations.
So a lot
no
of
promises.
Because I think we're going to do other interviews with other people in a variety of different walks of life that are in one way, shape, or form
Yeah.
leaders. We will not do
Yeah.
a better interview than this one.
Come on. No.
So on behalf of everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, Justin, sincere thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
Really appreciate it.
Man. Absolutely.
Take care,
It's
go
been
lead.
a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.